to be very quiet, so I'm going to have him talk really loud.
Okay.
And I'm going to walk out of the room to go work with some other kids. So here we go.
All right. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for sending the book and everything.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad to have it used.
With your experience at WAC and your viewpoint of your father working during the strike, what do you think the conflict would be?
Did you say if my father had worked there during the strike?
Yeah.
Okay. That's a really good question that I'm not sure I really thought of. Ask me the second part of that again so I can think about it a little bit. What would my what be?
What do you think the conflict is?
Okay. I guess that, it was a nationwide strike, so it wasn't just the RAF part, but I think that a lot of it was that the men, it was shortly after World War II, and the men that had been in the war had come home, and now they were getting their jobs back. And I think that they had been, because of being in the war, they now thought that they deserved maybe a little bit better, that they wanted the wages to be a little higher and things so that they could have a better life, and maybe they didn't like so much of the company, being so restrictive with their rules and things. So I think maybe that was part of it.
Okay. And then what do you think is a compromise of the strike?
Okay. I guess the compromise would sort of have been when they decided on how much the company wanted this much, and the union wanted the other amount for money, for salaries. So that was one of the compromises. Another one would have probably been that they had to compromise on some of their perks, I guess you'd call them, they didn't really have health care or anything back then for them, but they had to compromise on perhaps hours and how long they were required to work and maybe some of the working conditions. I do remember Russell saying that since it was a nationwide strike, that the company here and the union here would have settled for a couple of things, but they were not allowed to since the union was nationwide, and they had to wait until their national union told them they could do things. So they weren't really allowed to negotiate on their own, as just Waterloo. They had to wait for the whole union on the whole nation to tell them what they could do. So.
Yeah. Okay, and then how did your friend feel about the strike?
How did I feel about it, or I didn't get? My phone isn't probably working very well, so I need to think up a word there. How did what?
Your friend.
Oh, my friend, like Russell?
Yeah.
I think that he probably went through more strikes than just that one because he worked there a long time, but I think he felt that it was necessary to stand up to the company because the working conditions were pretty bad back then. They really didn't have any heating and cooling and all that stuff, and they had to work in a lot of bad conditions. And I think that he also, because he had other relatives that had worked there even previously, his father had worked there, I think he saw that they weren't treated well even in the past. So I believe that that's how he started to believe in unions. And the strike itself, he was one of the ones on the loudspeaker, that sort of kept the people engaged. And I think that he simply felt that it was necessary. I guess is the only way to really say. He just felt that it was a necessary thing. But I think he got very frustrated at some of the things that they couldn't do. They couldn't negotiate this, and they couldn't compromise on this. And some of the things he may have wanted to compromise on, he wasn't allowed to do. So.
Okay, and then how did he react to being arrested, and how was it like being in jail?
Okay. I remember him saying that, and Russell was a pretty tough guy. He was tall and strong, and for what work that he did, he had to be strong. But I remember him saying that he was afraid for his life when he was in prison because he thought I knew what tough was until I was down there in the prison. But he says you just sort of don't want to make eye contact with people, and you don't want to make any enemies because something might happen. He says all I wanted to do is do my time and get back home. I don't think he thought it was fair that he was there, but I think he also knew that they sort of had to make a scapegoat of someone. So luckily he didn't have to stay there more than a few months. So.
Okay, what did he think about the National Guard being called in?
Okay, he never said too much about that. I think he sort of expected it, that it was probably going to happen, and it was kind of interesting with the National Guard because some of the men that actually were there and striking actually had to serve in the National Guard because they were called. So then they had to go to the National Guard. They actually had to return there to the company, but they were on the other side. So that had to be strange, I remember him saying that was pretty hard to do. And most of the National Guardsmen at that time were pretty young because the ones that had been in the war were a little older and they weren't really back in the National Guard. So a lot of the National Guardsmen were pretty young, and I think that the reason the National Guard got called in was because the company the government or whatever, they wanted to make it look like a big show of strength, and I'm not sure if it worked or didn't work. Maybe it worked against them, maybe it worked for them. I wouldn't really know about that, but I did have a cousin that was in the National Guard at the time, and he said that it was a pretty strange environment down there. So.
Oh, okay. How was life like at home during the strike?
Okay. Well, I wasn't around then because I wasn't born yet. But my cousin said that it was a very tense time. My uncle, their father, they said that he had to drive out of town a lot, so he wasn't home a lot. And he said that they said that they had their rifle cabinet unlocked, and they never did that before.
Yeah.
And she said that her mother had to have a rifle that she would put up out of the reach of the children, but that she would put it up there at night so that she knew that she could if she had to get to it. I'm not really sure what they expected, but the tensions in the community were just very strong. And there were problems at the schools between the students, and some of their parents would come out and strike.
Hernandez, please report
Yeah, I
to the
remember you
office.
saying that in the book.
Yeah, yeah. So it was pretty tense, I guess. So, it sounded pretty tense, and like some of the people, even now, they didn't want to talk about it because it still made them feel scared. They just didn't want to talk about it. So.
Okay. And then what memories did he share that you think are most critical to the topic?
I think just having him have gone through it personally really brought it out to me. I was glad to find the loudspeaker transcript, but I was also a lot more glad that I had him personally to talk to me because he made it sound like he had really gone through it. It was an eyewitness account, I guess you'd say, and I think that he had lots of mixed feelings about how things went and what he was allowed to do and what he wasn't allowed to do and all that. But I can't remember him really stopping and saying, "This is off the record. I want to tell you this or that." He didn't really do that much. And it's been a while since I wrote the book, so I can't really remember if there was anything that I left out because he asked me to. I don't remember him asking that. He was pretty honest with me, but when he said, about what he said, so.
Okay. Do you think the strike helped or made it or hindered the workers?
The workers?
Yeah.
I think that it helped some and didn't help others because they had what they called that super seniority after the strike. And so I think if the company hadn't have done that and given super seniority to the workers that had come in during the strike so that they got special treatment and everything, I think that the strike would have calmed things a lot faster if they'd have just not done that. And then everybody would have come back in and not had such harsh feelings toward each other. But that made it not actually seem like it was done. It made it seem like it went on for years and years because the people that came in with the strike during the strike got paid better, got better, like perks and things than some of the other people, or maybe when they asked to have a better job, like they wanted to be promoted, they would get preference over the ones that had gone on strike. So you can imagine that would probably be pretty hard for a lot of people that were on a strike all that time to take it. So,
Yeah.
so it lasted a lot more than just a few months of the strike.
What do you think the impact of the strike was on Waterloo?
I think that since RAF was the largest employer at that time, the whole town was basically involved in it, and years afterwards, it is amazing how many people would still point back to that and say that was a very critical time. I think maybe since it did come right after World War II, when things were starting to change, things changed a lot after World War II, and I think that might have had an impact on the people too, as the World War II, and then a few years later they had the strike, and I think that brought things home to them and thought, wow, what's going on? Why is all this conflict going on? So I think that was the impact on the town. I don't think it had an impact on employment because that was the largest employer, but I'm sure that a lot of the people that didn't want to go back in after the strike found other jobs. We either went to John Deere or other places and maybe even moved out of town. And then, of course, having the trials afterwards, that dragged it out a little longer. So I would imagine for quite a few years it had an impact, but I really wouldn't know what impact it would have, after this long of a period of time.
Okay. And you might not know this, but what's the social impact?
Well, I would imagine that a lot of the people didn't talk to each other anymore. I would think that some of the people that may have been friends before the strike certainly weren't friends afterwards, and when they went, and did their daily things, we went out shopping or whatever. I'm sure that there were times when they'd run into people here or there, and they probably didn't fight with each other, but they probably didn't say, hello, how are you? How are your kids? They probably just had pretty much silence. I think that it probably had that kind of impact on people. There were probably a lot of people that just did not speak to each other anymore after that. So.
And then how about the political impact?
Well, let's see. I think that I can't remember whether some of the elected officials at the time had, stayed, got reelected or not. I do remember the judge that was, I think he was the city attorney at the time. I did talk to him later, and he said that he disagreed with some of the things that the company and the city wanted to do, and so he had a conflict with that. He didn't like some of the things that he thought they were coming down too hard on the strikers. He did not think that it was as violent a riot or anything as they wanted to make it out. So, but I guess I just didn't explore that part of it in the story. I just probably would have been a good thing to do.
Yeah, that's
it
fine.
didn't occur to me. So.
Okay. And then the economic impact.
Okay. There were a lot of people, especially the union people, that said that they didn't really feel that RAF ever totally recovered from that strike. I couldn't say how many strikes or how many bad strikes they had after that, but a lot of the people that I talked to about that strike, they really pointed to that strike that said that wasn't the same after that. There were too many problems internally with the people and the just hard feelings, against the company and hard feelings against each other when they had to work side by side again. So a lot of the people pointed to that as part of that's when RAF started to go downhill. Now, I'm sure there were a lot of other economic impacts too. There probably, markets and all that, but I think that the strike did kind of help RAF, downturn and did not let them stay in business maybe as long as they might have.
Okay, and so for my History Day project, I'm doing a website. What do you think would be the most important thing to include in it?
Wow. That's a good one. Why don't you ask me that question again? Let me think about it a second.
Okay, so I'm creating a website, and what do you think would be the most like important thing to include or things to include?
Okay. Well, pictures. I think that a lot of the pictures really brought things home to me and really made me feel the impact. The picture of the National Guardsman standing in front of the Union headquarters, I thought that one was pretty dramatic because of just the idea of were they protecting their Union headquarters or were they trying to keep people out? That was kind of hard to determine. And the pictures of the tanks, going down the street seemed a bit extreme to me. I think that the crowds, and just how many people were involved in it were impressive to me as to how many people were actually there participating at the time. I think that the actual things that if I was doing a website, I liked a lot of the quotes, from the people, from the workers that to me, it seems like whenever a certain amount of background is always necessary to make a story, but when you really have quotes from people that were there, participated at the time in their own language and what they say, I think that that's the most striking things that brings it home the best is, what did they say or how did they feel? So that's why I like to use a lot of the quotes and things.
Okay, that was actually my last question. Thank you for helping me and answering my questions.
Oh, I'm glad to. It was interesting to me too.
Okay, bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, helpful?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we stop there. And
Yes.
we're going to stop here.